The resonant chamber of the Nexus was a testament to the inconceivable patience of geology and biology intertwined. It was a sphere of living crystal, kilometers in diameter, that had been grown, not built, over 100 millennia by the Concordance's founding species, the Glyptons. It hummed with a low, thrumming energy, the accumulated psychic residue of eons of diplomacy. Floating in the vast, stardusted interior were the ambassadorial pods, arranged in concentric circles of influence and antiquity. At the very center, a sphere of captured light pulsed with the slow, measured rhythm of a cosmic heartbeat, shifting in color to reflect the tenor of the proceedings. In a modest pod on the third ring, among the more recently admitted species, sat Ambassador Elia's Thorn of Earth. To the multifaceted eyes of the galactic community, he was a perfect specimen of his kind, and his kind was perfectly adequate. Humans were soft, squishy bipeds of middling height and unimpressive strength. They had no natural armor, no visible claws, no intimidating mandibles. Their primary sensory organs, two forward-facing eyes, were noted in the xenobiological archives as being curiously primitive, lacking the panoramic scope of the Orpheans or the gravimetric sensitivity of the Cthraxi. Thorn himself embodied this apparent mediocrity. He wore a simple, dark blue fabric uniform, devoid of the ceremonial chitin plates of the Xylan warrior diplomats or the shimmering energy fields that denoted the rank of the Glypton High Resonators. He was unfailingly polite, his voice modulated and calm, his posture relaxed. For 3 standard cycles, he had been a model addition to the Concordance, respecting every arcane procedural rule, offering condolences and congratulations with equal sincerity, and voting with the cautious, consensus-building majority. He was seen as a representative of a young, eager species, a harmless herbivore cautiously stepping into a forest of ancient trees. Today, the central light of the chamber was a troubled, muddy violet. The issue at hand was the Cathar encroachment. The Cathar, a non-concordant species of rapacious silicon-based juggernauts, were methodically consuming the outlying systems of the Lumina, a species of fragile, bioluminescent gas beings. The Lumina pod, a shimmering soap bubble of containment, pulsed with desperate, frantic flashes of light, a silent scream translated into sterile text on the other ambassadors' displays. "Esteemed colleagues," began the being in the central, most ornate pod. High Resonator Olivan, a towering crystalline entity, spoke not with a voice but with a series of harmonized chimes that a translation device rendered into galactic standard. His form, a complex lattice of slowly shifting geometric shapes, refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Protocol 7 Delta 9 of the Concordance Accords requires a period of meditative reflection before a motion of censure can be considered. A ripple of agreement, a collective murmur of assorted clicks, chirps, and subsonic hums echoed through the chamber. It was the sound of bureaucracy as a shield. From a pod plated in gleaming, obsidian chitin, Blade Marshal Vorlag of the Xylan Ascendancy shifted his weight. The Xylans were 7-foot-tall insectoids, their warrior past evident in their serrated limbs and the proud, rigid set of their multipartite heads. Vorlag was considered a progressive, yet even he was bound by tradition. "The High Resonator speaks with the wisdom of ages," Vorlag's voice rasped, a sound like stones grinding together. "The honor of the Concordance demands a measured response." The Xylan Ascendancy proposes the formation of a subcommittee for strategic assessment to analyze the Cathar's logistical capabilities. A thorough understanding must precede any action. More murmurs, more procedural safety. In his pod, Thorn remained perfectly still. His placid expression did not change. His hands rested, one over the other, on the cool metal of his console. But inside his mind, a cold, hard knot was beginning to form. They're not debating a solution, he thought, a familiar weariness settling over him. They're debating the proper way to watch a people die. He watched the Lumina ambassador, Glimmer Priestess Alara. Her form, a swirling cloud of gold and silver light within its containment field, was beginning to dim. Her translated text was a simple, repeating plea. "They burn our worlds. They extinguish our young. Help us." "Please," the matriarch of the Cthraxi, a massive saurian creature whose species had sublimated their apex predator instincts into ruthless economic warfare, spoke next. Her voice was a wet, guttural hiss, slick with condescension. "Sanctions," Matriarch Escalar rasped, her huge, lidless yellow eyes blinking slowly. "The Cathar rely on tritium shipments that pass through Orphean space. A trade embargo, carefully managed by my corporation, for a nominal administrative fee, of course, would cripple their war machine within, 5 to 10 standard years." Few pods away, Cantor Phaeon of the Orpheans fluttered his iridescent blue-green feathers in agitation. The Orpheans were avian empaths, and the collective anxiety of the chamber was causing him physical distress. 10 years. Matriarch, the Lumina do not have 10 months. My people feel their fading light. It is a great sorrow. Thorn knew this dance. He'd seen it in the halls of the United Nations back on Earth, a microcosm of the same galactic paralysis. The powerful were too comfortable to risk their position, the traditionalists were too afraid of breaking precedent, and the avaricious saw only opportunity. The victim was just a line item in a cost-benefit analysis. High Resonator Olivan chimed again. The Cthraxi proposal has merit and will be entered into the record for consideration by the subcommittee once it is formed. Ambassador Thorn of Terra, you have been silent. Does the fledgling human federation have a perspective? The condescension was subtle, wrapped in the Glypton's formal melodic tones, but it was there. Fledgling. Thorn inclined his head, the picture of deference. He activated his vocalizer. Thank you, High Resonator, he said, his voice even and measured. Humanity is new to this august body, and we are still learning its venerable traditions. We have only our own history to draw upon, a history admittedly fraught with a barbarism we hope to have transcended. A few polite chirps of acknowledgement. They loved hearing that. It confirmed their own superiority. We have studied the data on the Cathar, Thorn continued, his eyes sweeping across the chamber, lingering for a fraction of a second on each key player. Their societal structure is not based on economics or honor. It is based on consumption and expansion. They are, in the bluntest terms, a cancer, and our history teaches us that you cannot negotiate with a cancer. You cannot sanction it into remission. You must cut it out decisively and completely. A hush fell. This was unusually direct language for the resonant chamber. Humanity supports the Lumina. We propose the formation of a unified deterrent posture. A fleet, under Concordance command, positioned at the border of Lumina space. Not to attack, but to make the cost of further encroachment unacceptably high. To show the Cathar that the Concordance is not a debating society, but a unified shield for its members. Blade Marshal Vorlag's mandibles clicked softly. An interesting proposal, vague enough to be diplomatic, yet with a core of steel. Define deterrent posture, Ambassador, the Xylan warrior asked, his tone betraying a flicker of professional interest, and just like that the debate shifted. They were no longer discussing the Lumina's survival, but the semantic nuance of the word deterrent. For the next 4 hours, they argued. They argued about fleet composition, rules of engagement, command structure, and the philosophical implications of preemptive deployment. Thorn remained outwardly calm, but something inside him was beginning to fray. He watched the Lumina pod. The Glimmer Priestess was no longer pleading. She was just a dull, fading ember of light, a silent testament to their failure. He'd been chosen for this role because he was the best. A decorated veteran of the Outer Rim skirmishes, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and still chose to believe in its best. He was a strategist who understood that true strength wasn't in aggression, but in control. He had spent years mastering the art of the diplomatic facade, of burying the soldier deep beneath layers of civility. He was a cage built around a predator, and the bars were beginning to rattle. Blade Marshal Vorlag was the only one who seemed to notice. The old warrior's multifaceted eyes kept drifting back to the human pod. He saw something in Thorn's stillness that was different from the Glypton's geological patience or the Cthraxi's cold-blooded languor. It was the stillness of a hunting cat in long grass, the stillness of absolute readiness. While the others saw a harmless newcomer, Vorlag, who had led charges against pirate fleets and stared down rebellions, saw a fellow professional. But there was something else there, too. Something he couldn't quite classify, something ancient and unsettling, hidden behind a carefully constructed mask of soft-spoken reason. He dismissed it as an old soldier's paranoia. He was wrong. The proceedings dragged into another cycle. The Subcommittee for Strategic Assessment was formally chartered, with Blade Marshal Vorlag at its head. It was given a mandate of 1 full rotational period to deliver its initial findings. 1 year, the Cthraxi-led motion for sanctions was sent to a different subcommittee for economic impact analysis. Another year, at least, humanity, as a junior member, was granted a non-voting seat on Vorlag's committee. It was a token gesture, a pat on the head for the earnest young species. Thorn accepted with his usual grace, but as the session adjourned and the central light brightened to a neutral gold, he shared a private comm link with the Lumina pod. His display read Alara's faint, flickering message. They have left us to die. Thorn didn't offer platitudes. He didn't promise to redouble his efforts in the committees. He sent back a simple, 2-word message for her eyes only, Hold on, the promise felt like a lie in his own mouth. He had played by their rules. He had presented a logical, moderate, yet firm course of action. He had been a good diplomat, and all he had accomplished was to be given a better seat from which to watch the slaughter. The knot in his gut tightened, and for the first time in a decade, he felt the low, familiar growl of the beast he kept chained in the dungeons of his soul. Over the next few weeks, the situation deteriorated. The Cathar, emboldened by the Concordance's transparent inaction, accelerated their campaign. They weren't just taking territory anymore, they were engaging in systematic extermination. Reports filtered in through scattered listening posts, reports of Lumina gas giants being ignited, of nursery nebulae being poisoned. The Concordance responded with formal expressions of deep concern. Thorn worked tirelessly. He met with Vorlag, presenting detailed strategic analyses of the Cathar's weaknesses his own military intelligence had identified. The Xylan was impressed by the human's grasp of logistics and tactical chokepoints. Thinking is remarkably clear, Ambassador, Vorlag had rasped during one meeting in his Spartan metallic office. Aggressive, unconventional, you think like a hunter. We had to, Thorn had replied smoothly, keeping his smile placid. Our homeworld was competitive. We learned to adapt or perish. He met with Matriarch Escalar, arguing that a collapsed Lumina civilization would create a power vacuum the Cathar would fill, ultimately disrupting C-Thraxi trade routes far more than a military intervention would. The Matriarch had listened, her great yellow eyes unblinking, and had told him the long-term risk models were within acceptable parameters. Profit today outweighed chaos tomorrow. He even attempted to appeal to the Glypton sense of history, arguing that the Concordance's founding principle was mutual defense. High Resonator Olivan had responded with a cascade of chimes that translated to a lecture on the 1,000-year-long precedent for non-interference in non-member conflicts. It was like punching water. Every effort was absorbed and dissipated by the vast, placid inertia of the council. Thorn felt his frustration building, a physical pressure behind his eyes. He slept less, the lines on his face deepening. The diplomatic mask was becoming heavy. His staff noted his quiet intensity had sharpened into a brittle tension. He would stand for hours at the viewport in his quarters, staring out at the Nexus, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists behind his back. The breaking point arrived during an emergency session of the full Concordance. A refugee vessel, one of the last to escape the Lumina core systems, had made it to the Nexus. Its data core contained unfiltered visual records of the Cathar's final assault on Lumina Prime, the species' home nebula. Protocol dictated such evidence be reviewed by a committee before being presented to the full chamber, to ensure it was not emotionally manipulative. But the Lumina Glimmer Priestess, Alara, what was left of her, bypassed all of it. In an act of pure desperation, she seized control of the chamber's central holoprojector. The air in the center of the resonant chamber shimmered, and then the image resolved. It was not a sterile tactical display. It was a vision from hell, a vast, swirling cloud of incandescent life. The Lumina home nebula was under assault. Jagged, black Cathar ships, looking like shards of obsidian, tore through the glowing gas, firing weapons that didn't explode but silenced. They created spheres of absolute nothingness, snuffing out light and life, erasing consciousness from the universe. The recording showed a nursery, a dense pocket of brilliant, newborn lumina, tiny sparks of sentient light, being methodically extinguished. There was no sound, but the entire chamber could feel the psychic death scream embedded in the recording. Cantor Fion, the Orphean ambassador, let out a strangled cry and collapsed, his feathers losing their luster as he was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the empathic agony. Several other ambassadors from prey-evolved species recoiled, their pods dimming in horror. Glimmer Priestess Alara's light flared one last, brilliant time, projecting a final, galaxy-spanning image of her entire species being wiped from existence. Then her containment field registered a flatline. The swirling, golden light within it collapsed into a single, sad point of fading dust. The Lumina were extinct, and the Concordance had borne witness. A wave of shock rippled through the chamber. Even the C-Thraxi matriarch looked momentarily disturbed. High Resonator Olivan was the first to recover. His chimes were discordant, shaken, but the ingrained addiction to procedure took over. A tragic, tragic development, he toned, the translation sterile and obscene in its inadequacy. This flagrant breach of protocol by the late Lumina ambassador is regrettable. The chair suggests we table the current session to allow the relevant committees to process this new data and to draft a formal, posthumous condemnation of the Cathar's actions. That was it. That was the line, the condemnation. A strongly worded letter to a genocidal empire, a footnote in a history book. In the human pod, Elias Thorne did not move, but everything about him changed. The change was not in his posture or his expression, not at first. It was in the air around him. The temperature in his immediate vicinity seemed to drop. The ambient hum of the chamber felt suddenly muted, as if it were afraid to intrude on the silence emanating from the human. Blade Marshal Vorlag felt it first. A prickling on his dorsal chitin, an instinct honed over 100 campaigns screaming at him. Threat, apex threat. Uncaged. He turned his head slowly, his multifaceted eyes locking onto Thorne's pod. Thorne was looking at the fading dust motes in the Lumina containment field. His face, which had been a mask of diplomatic composure for years, was now utterly blank. It was a terrifying blankness, more expressive than any rage. It was the face of a slate that had been wiped clean of all social conditioning, all politeness, all restraint. Then he raised his head and looked at High Resonator Olivan. It was just a look. But in that look, the Glypton, a being of living crystal who had not known fear in 10,000 years, saw the abyss. Thorne's eyes were no longer the passive receptors of a harmless herbivore. They were the eyes of something that had stalked the midnight savannas of a forgotten world, the eyes of a creature that had looked into the darkness and seen only a hunting ground. They were not angry, they were not sad, they were assessing, weighing. Judging, a sound came from Thorne's pod. It was not a word. It was a low, guttural vibration that started deep in his chest. It was a sound no one in that chamber had ever heard from a sentient, civilized being. It was the sound of a predator about to kill, a growl. The sound sliced through the chamber's stunned silence. It was primal, ancient, and it vibrated in the bones of every being present. The Orphean ambassador, reviving from his empathic swoon, whimpered and tried to make himself smaller. Matriarch Escalar's neck frills, usually flat against her thick hide, flared out in an involuntary display of agitation. Even Blade Marshal Vorlag felt his manipulator claws twitch, a reflexive urge to find the hilt of a weapon he no longer carried. Thorne stood up. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with the soft, fleshy form they had always seen. He wasn't the shuffling, chair-bound diplomat anymore. He was balanced on the balls of his feet, coiled like a spring. The simple fabric of his uniform suddenly seemed inadequate, like paper wrapped around a steel blade. Condemnation, he said. His voice was unrecognizable. The pleasant, modulated tenor was gone. This was a new voice, a quiet baritone that carried no warmth, only the chilling weight of absolute certainty. It didn't need to be loud. It filled the cavernous chamber, and every syllable was a chip of ice. You watched a species die, he continued, his gaze sweeping from the Glypton to the Cthraxi to the Xylan. His eyes were not blinking. You watched a fire burn out, and your only thought was to write a memo about the smoke. He took a step forward to the very edge of his pod's floor. His hands were at his sides, fingers slightly curled, not fists. Something more dangerous, something ready. For 3 years I have listened to your protocols, your traditions, your self-congratulatory debates. I have played your game. I have held my tongue while you spoke of honor and process as a justification for cowardice. High Resonator Olivan finally found his chimes. Ambassador Thorne, your language is unacceptable. You are in breach of... Breach. Thorne's laugh was short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. It was the bark of a wolf. You speak to me of breaches. Let me tell you about a breach. Humanity clawed its way to sentience on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We were not the strongest, not the fastest. We had no venom, no armor, no natural weapons. We had only this. He tapped his temple with one finger, and the spirit of a persistence hunter. We were the creatures who would watch a herd for days, learning its patterns. We would pick out the weak, the old, the arrogant. And then we would run it to death. For miles, for days. We would bleed it, exhaust it, and break its will. We didn't just kill our prey. We dismantled it piece by piece. He turned his chilling, analytical gaze on Matriarch Escalar. You think your economic games are predation? That is a child playing with toys. You have domesticated yourselves, turned the kill into a negotiation. You've forgotten the purity of it, the necessity. He looked at Blade Marshal Vorlag. And you. You speak of honor, a warrior's code. A worthy ideal, but honor is a luxury. Your ancestors were killers. They knew the truth. You've wrapped that truth in so many layers of ceremony that you can no longer see it. You posture, you threaten. But you will not act until the protocol is satisfied. You have forgotten how to hunt. A wave of terror, pure and undiluted, washed through the chamber. This was not a diplomatic incident. This was a revelation. It was as if a pet primate they'd been teaching to paint had suddenly started explaining the principles of nuclear fission. It was a fundamental category error, and the consequences were terrifying. Thorne then locked eyes again with the crystalline form of the High Resonator. You, High Resonator, you and your kind. You are prey, you evolved in a world of plenty, of slow, geological time. You have never had to look over your shoulder. You have never felt the hot breath of a predator on your neck. You believe that reason and rules are the ultimate power in the universe because you have never faced a power that simply does not care for your rules. He took a deep, slow breath. The silence in the chamber was absolute, a perfect vacuum of fear. Humanity is different, we never forgot. Our nightmares are filled with teeth and claws. Our deepest instincts are to watch the shadows. We built our civilization not to escape our nature, but to control it, to aim it. We put the beast in a cage, yes, but we did not kill it. We trained it. We honed it. We gave it mathematics and strategic theory and logistics. We taught the monster how to read. He smiled then. It was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. It was not a baring of teeth like a Cthraxi. It was a precise, controlled movement of facial muscles that conveyed nothing but the promise of intelligent, meticulously planned violence. You have spent the last year treating a caged tiger like a house cat. You poked it, you starved its allies, you displayed a breathtaking incompetence that put everything at risk. And now you sit there after watching the cosmic equivalent of a school burning down and you want to draft a letter. He raised his right hand and placed it flat on his console. "The difference between us," he said, his voice dropping to an almost whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout, "is that a predator knows that at the end of all the talking, all the posturing, someone has to bleed. The universe doesn't run on consensus. It runs on physics, on cause and effect." Then he did something simple. He clenched his hand into a fist and brought it down on the console. It wasn't a wild, angry blow. It was a short, sharp, perfectly controlled impact. The sound, a sharp crack, echoed in the silent chamber, but that wasn't the horrifying part. The console, made of a Glypton-grown alloy rated to withstand micrometeorite impacts, now had a perfect, fist-shaped indentation in its surface. Spiderweb cracks radiated outwards. Thorn lifted his hand. There was no blood, no broken bones. He hadn't even flinched. He simply flexed his fingers, showing their perfect integrity. It was a demonstration not of rage, but of capacity. "I can shatter what you believe is unbreakable, and it will cost me nothing." He straightened up, the hunter's crouch gone, replaced by the rigid posture of a commander. The diplomat was dead. The predator was gone, the soldier was now in charge. "Here is what will happen," he stated. There was no room for debate in his tone. "The Cathar are not a political problem. They are a pest infestation. We will deal with them. The Concordance will provide a fleet, all of you, your best ships, your best crews. Humanity will provide the command structure, the strategy, and the will. We will lead this force. We will drive the Cathar back to their blighted home system, and we will impose terms that ensure they never threaten another living thing in this galaxy again." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This is not a proposal. It is not a motion to be debated. It is the new reality. My government will be transmitting the operational plans within the hour. Your only choice is the number of ships you wish to contribute to your own survival. The committee meetings are over. The time for talk is done. You will act or you will be left behind. And you will find that being left behind in a galaxy that now contains a fully awake humanity is a very cold place to be." He looked around the chamber one last time. At the terrified Glypton, the stunned Cthraxi, the deeply conflicted but respectful Xylan. "The vote is now," he said, his voice flat. "Acknowledge and comply." Silence, the resonant chamber, for millennia a forum of stately debate, had become a hostage negotiation. But the hostage was the Concordance itself, and its captor was its savior. Blade Marshal Vorlag was the first to react. The Xylan warrior stood to his full height. He saw it all now with sickening clarity. The stillness, the unnerving gaze, the strategic genius. It wasn't a human trying to be a warrior. It was a warrior trying and failing to pretend to be a bureaucrat. He saw the fist-shaped dent in the console and understood it was not a threat, but a promise. Humanity wasn't more civilized than the Xylans. They were infinitely more dangerous because their predatory nature was governed by a cold, terrifying intellect, not by ritual or honor. He gave a sharp, formal nod, the Xylan sign of acknowledging a superior officer. "The Xylan ascendancy acknowledges and will comply," he rasped. His voice was filled with a new, profound respect that was indistinguishable from fear. One by one, the others followed. Matriarch Escalar, her mind furiously recalculating every risk assessment she had ever made about the soft-skinned newcomers, gave a guttural hiss of assent. The cost of defying this revealed human was clearly greater than the cost of war. Cantor Fion, still trembling, chirped a weak affirmation. The empathy he felt from Thorn now not anger, but a vast, sorrowful resolve. Finally, all eyes turned to High Resonator Olivan. The crystalline being was shuddering, his internal light flickering chaotically. The foundation of his universe, that order and protocol were the ultimate shields, had been shattered. He was looking at Thorn, but he was seeing the ghost of 1,000 forgotten ancestors fleeing from a shadow with intelligent eyes. His chimes were weak, discordant, stripped of all their authority. The concordance acknowledges, the translation device stammered. And will comply, gave a single, sharp nod. The transformation was complete. The diplomatic mask settled back over his features, but it was different now. It was no longer a disguise, it was a warning. Everyone in the chamber, everyone who would hear of this day, would know what lay beneath the calm voice and the polite smile. They would know that humanity's civility was not a sign of weakness, but a measure of its terrifying self-control. Without another word, Thorn turned, and his pod began to recede from the center, heading for the exit portal. He left behind a silence that was deeper and more profound than any the resonant chamber had ever known. It was the silence of prey that has just realized the shepherd that protects them from the wolves is itself a far more intelligent and patient kind of wolf. As his pod slid into the docking bay, Thorn's shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind the familiar, aching weight of command. He looked at his hand, the knuckles slightly bruised, a small price. He had broken 1,000 years of tradition. He had terrified his allies. He had unleashed a part of himself and his species that he had prayed would never be necessary. He had saved the Lumina, or at least, he had ensured they would be avenged and that this would not happen again. But in doing so, he had changed humanity's place in the galaxy forever. They were no longer the earnest newcomers. They were the apex at the table. The monster that could be reasoned with but not defied. In the now empty resonant chamber, the Weaver ambassador, Pattern Master Zix, who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, began to spin. Its arachnoid limbs moved with frantic speed, creating a new section of its vast historical web. The old patterns of the concordance, neat, orderly, predictable spirals of influence, were suddenly being torn apart and rewoven around a new, central point of terrifying gravity. The new pattern was chaotic, asymmetric, and radiated immense power. Zix did not know if this new shape was salvation or doom. The data was insufficient. The only certainty was that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had arrived, and they had reminded the stars of a very old, very bloody truth. Peace is not the natural state of the universe. It is a truce, enforced by the credible threat of violence. And humanity, it turned out, was the most credible threat of all. The question that hung in the silent, humming air was not whether the concordance was safe from the Cathar, but whether it would ever truly be safe from its new protectors.